Hello and welcome to the Hub on CGTN. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. The China-ASEAN relationship has been a remarkable one, especially in terms of trade. China, of course, has been ASEAN's largest trading partner for over a decade, and most recently, ASEAN has taken over the EU as China's largest trading partner. Now, where is this relationship headed, especially in terms of investment and trade? What are the new opportunities and challenges for investors, businesses, traders, and policymakers on both sides? Today, I'm very happy to be joined by Mr. Arsjad Rasjid, Chairman of the ASEAN Business Advisory Council, for an exclusive interview. Here's our conversation. Chairman Rasjid, welcome to the Hub on CGTN and welcome to Beijing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Indeed, you wear many hats. You're the head of the energy company, Indica Energy, and then you also serve as chair of the chamber in your country, and also this time around, you're the chair of ASEAN Business Advisory Council.
That's right.
What do you hope to accomplish by your visit to Beijing this time around?
Hey, this is part of what we is the roadshow that we are. We've visited every ASEAN countries. We spoke to all the businesses, the stakeholders, the governments, and so forth. And then after that, we are now in the roadshow with the ASEAN partners or countries who are interested to work with ASEAN. So of course, one of our great friend is China. So I'm here in Beijing today, I'll be in Shanghai, and actually be going to Chengdu in the next couple of days. What is important is we want to bring the voice of the business. Yeah. What we want to see is that, in ASEAN right now, we are redefining. ASEAN has always been led just by the government, but we do believe that the business sectors should play a role. And so becoming a co-driver in this, particularly when we talk about economy and a lot of challenges moving forward. And that's why we're here to actually meet with Chinese chambers, Chinese companies, and to talk about ASEAN, what we are thinking about the priorities of conversation that's happening in ASEAN today. And of course, inviting Chinese companies, not only large, but medium, small, to participate together. And at the same time, inviting Chinese companies to participate in what we call the ASEAN Week in September. There'll be a lot of series of events from September 1st all the way to September 8th this year. We have the ASEAN Business Investment Summit, and we also have the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific Forum. So all of these are happening in Jakarta, and we would like to have Chinese companies to participate, and of course to be able to know better and to work together.
Yeah, well, we'll be talking about those specific issues. I understand your organization takes the mandate of taking into account the feedback of private businesses. But for the moment, I want to ask you broadly about China-ASEAN relations, which is remarkable if you think about it. China has been actually ASEAN's largest trading partner for over a decade.
Yes.
And most recently, ASEAN takes over the EU as the biggest trading partner for China. If you think about the upgraded free trade agreement, the RCEP, RCEP over there, how do you look at where this economic and trade relations is between China and ASEAN?
No, I think we should take this to a higher level again, to strengthen further this relationship between ASEAN and China. As you mentioned, the RCEP is ASEAN and of course other countries including China. Trade agreements between Indonesia, for example, and China, we are now upgrading that also, right? So I think what we are seeing is after this pandemic situation, we see a new normal, a new reality, and especially with what's happening, unfortunate conflicts in Ukraine and Russia, and what's happening in the world. Let's say how U.S. and China relationship on trades today. So this is the part that we do believe in ASEAN, that we want to work with all. We want to show that message very clearly, that we don't want to choose any country. We want to work with all. And this is one of the ways that we see that there's a lot more we can do together. But it is also important for China to respect that, in ASEAN, we need your support also, how to strengthen our regional supply chains. Because once we have also strengthened our regional supply chain in ASEAN, we can be part of the global supply chains and be part of the supply chain for China. Take an example of electric vehicles, right? This is one of the strategy in ASEAN that our president brought to this conversation in ASEAN. Originally, it was in Indonesia. We call it the electric vehicle ecosystems. And now it is an ASEAN strategy. So now we say, okay, please, let's participate. And we are very happy. I mean, a Chinese company, CGTN, is already in Indonesia today, and many others. But what we want to see is not just the large corporation, but we want to see the medium-sized, the small companies of China to work more with ASEANs. And that's, I think, one of our main goals.
Yeah, I'm sure there are a whole lot of interested parties going on now that COVID is almost behind us. You briefly touched upon the rivalry between Beijing and Washington, and you recently said during an interview with Nikkei Asia that there is emerging over there an economic cold war which has forced ASEAN countries to create quote-unquote China and non-China portfolios for their products. Yeah. Can you elaborate?
I mean, we are living as something that's very unfortunate, the way we look at it. I mean, but the reality today, yes, I said that. It is today already we are in an economic cold war, right? For us, again, as I say, we want to work with all. But what's happening today, it seems that the world is, in the supply chains of the world, after the pandemic, there was the breakdown of the global supply chains. Of course, there is this regional supply chains happening. But again, now this global supply chain is coming back with not just one, but two, unfortunately. Now it's like, there's a China and non-China, per se. And for us, I mean, for ASEAN, for Indonesia, we want to work with all. And we want to participate in any supply chain. For us is, we want to do business because all our goal is about prosperity. For prosperity for our people. And in order to create that prosperity, we have to make sure there is an economic growth in our countries. And we want to be able to actually create revenues for our companies, for the people at the end. But it seems that the world is dividing. And it seems that, economically, there is these two supply chains happening. And for us, we want to be agile. We want to be adaptive, innovative, and resilient to this.
Obviously, some countries are ready to sacrifice their bottom line for what they allege to be national security concerns. This repeated rhetoric of de-risking, firstly initiated by policymakers and parliamentarians in Europe, and recently got picked up and repeated by politicians in Washington. How do you look at that, de-risking?
It's like this, right? Number one, there is this value in Indonesia called unity in diversity. It is our symbol. If you look at our national symbol, there is this bird called Garuda holding these words called Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, the unity in diversity. We respect the perspective or the differences. But if you can unite, actually, that becomes very strong. So, for example, what's happening today? We respect the views of the EU. We respect the view of the US. We respect the view of China and every country in the world. Perhaps, as you mentioned just now, there is a burden to the consumers with what's happening, right? With this, what's happening with the new policy in EU or in the US. But for us, that's for the US to think and for the US to analyze and to decide. And same thing with EU. We have a goal. We want to be like China. We want to be like the US. We want to be like EU, We want our country to prosper, in the whole ASEAN. That's why we have a vision now, the ASEAN vision of 2045. Indonesia too have this vision of 2045. Indonesia, we want to be number 4, number 5 economic of the world, right? We want to be advanced country. We don't want to be just this developing, emerging country, but we need the help of all the partners. For example, with China, we like more Chinese companies to invest in Indonesia, to work together with Indonesia. But of course, the US and EU, we also invite all of them. Say, let's work together. Let's invest in Indonesia. So that's what we see.
Talking about investment in ASEAN countries, many of our friends in China expressed interest in investing in emerging markets such as Vietnam, taking advantage of the relatively lower labor costs and very lucrative government policies. For example, tax-free, corporate tax-free first 2 years and then 50% off for the next 4 years, so on and so forth. What do you identify as opportunities for Chinese investors to Indonesia in particular and ASEAN at large?
No, I see tremendous, what's happening in ASEAN. I take one example is Indonesia, right? Recently, we just actually reform, we call it the omnibus law. So many transformation that we are doing, our president, from the what we call the new job creation law to make investment easier. Now we just recently actually add another omnibus law, what we call the health omnibus law, in which we want to open up the health industry. We want to see how we can work with others with technology, with physicians, doctors, and all globally, like for example with China. So there is a new transformation of this health industry. And I think there's this health industry ecosystem. There's a lot we can do, whether it is vaccination, medicines, hospitals, clinics, and all. And this is a great opportunities. Yes. And also another opportunity, if our new capital city, we call Nusantara, there is something also as a new center of growth, and a center of growth not only for Indonesia, but for ASEAN, because it's located in Borneo, this new capital city we have. Yeah. So we call it ourselves Kalimantan, but that whole island is Borneo. So there is Brunei there's Malaysia, which is Sabah and Sarawak, and then of course the Kalimantans, which is then the Indonesian side. So we say, hey, this is a new growth for not just Indonesia, but also for that. So there's a lot of opportunities and a lot of government incentive. Let's say this initiative on the capital city, for example. The government is saying, hey, anybody who works there, for example, in the capital city, will have zero income tax for the next 10 years. That's very attractive. Then, of course, 50% of your income tax for the next 10 years. That's attractive. Then other incentive programs of pioneer industries and so forth. So for Indonesia, ASEAN is doing this. We are transforming ourselves. We want to welcome more investments.
I have a very impressive set of data. Population 650 million.
Yes, growing, and it's growing.
Growing.
Yes.
By 2030, 70% of the population in ASEAN will move into the middle class.
Yes.
And per capita GDP currently is over $4,000. GDP growth 5.2%.
Yes.
It is growing by all accounts.
It is. And very young demography. Yeah. And particularly by Indonesia, by the Philippines, very young demography, right? And you can see that the ingredients of growth, yeah. Besides that, we also have, what we call the ingredients for sustainable development. For example, we talk about carbon credit, and we talk about carbon credit. We talk about forests. That ASEAN is called the lungs of the world. There's a lot of
so has the Amazon.
Yeah.
When I visit Brazil, people call the Amazon
That's true.
the lung of the forest too,
Yes,
but with all due respect, of course, Indonesia.
No, it's true. But there is these two lungs.
The largest archipelago
in South America and also in here in ASEAN, right? And more than that, we have a lot of natural resources, right? That we have, right? For example, nickels, right? That is, one we have to create for batteries, as an example. We have the bauxite, we have all the others, the silicon. So we have tin, we have many other things. And gold, silver, you name it, right? So besides the people population, the richness of the human, there is also the natural resources. So the ingredients is there, but we need more investment, we need more technology, we need those to come in because we want to create also value added. Let's work together and create this value added in Indonesia, for example, or in ASEAN, in order for ASEAN, Indonesia, to be able to create more prosperity for our people.
Talking about trade in goods and services, what do you think are the highlights? I understand you're representing a lot of private companies here in China. What are the new sectors of growth in your opinion?
So when we in ASEAN, we agree that one is digital transformation, because this one we do believe that small medium enterprises will be able to actually participate and be more involved in creating this access to market. So digital transformation, so any businesses in digital, right? It's actually application to all sectors. Second is actually I mentioned to you about health, the health resilience, so health industries, which is happening all over. Third is actually about a sustainable development. I was mentioning about how we need, energy transition, how we have our forests, but at the same time, how we want to create more renewable energy in the country, in all ASEAN. And this creating a lot of the sustainable businesses, sustainable development business in ASEAN. And of course, food security. This is where the part that we say, we are an agriculture country, maybe in ASEAN, maybe out of Singapore, but the rest, we are all agriculture. And we can do more things in this way, right? And also the blue economy in a way of, Indonesia particularly, we have archipelago, we have 14,000 islands, we have more of the seas rather than the water than the land. And there's a lot of opportunities to have seafood, right? And this is food, right? And this is the part that, I think all of us can participate in this and, how to become that food supply chains to the world.
Also tourism, no?
Of course.
You think of Thailand,
of course,
Indonesia, the Philippines.
Yes.
Scuba diving, the heaven of scuba diving.
Yes, exactly. We need more. That's why we're building the infrastructures first, right? There's so many beautiful places. If you go to Papua as an example, right? You can see, we call it Raja Empat. You can see the water depth all the way, It's very nice. And there is Labuan Bajo. In Thailand, of course, Vietnam, right? And of course, Malaysia is also building up more and others. So Laos, everybody, yeah. So tourism is one more thing. But one thing is also interesting that I just want to mention to you is how we are actually introducing what we call the ASEAN QR code, which actually will help this tourism and also transaction. This is the ASEAN QR code, and we'll be using local currencies. Each of us just use our own local currencies, and we actually also be able to reduce the cost of the transactions because we don't have to go to international clearances, it's just between us.
Wait a sec, so if you have a Chinese smartphone and you scan a code with their Chinese phone, with whatever app, for example, WeChat.
So what's happening right now, ASEAN is making that. And of course, it's all, I do believe it was started with China, with WeChat and all these things. So now in ASEAN, we are doing it ourselves, each one of us, and then interconnect them within us in ASEAN. Later on, let's say the payment gateway here in China and payment gateway in any country in ASEAN will actually do that agreement clearances so they can use it also. But within ASEAN, we want to do that also. Indonesia will be able to use Indonesian rupiah when doing a transaction. So people from Thai who visited Indonesia, for example, goes to the traditional market, they can buy and using that Thai because it's just a QR code.
I think that would give a huge boost to tourism.
Oh yes, tourism, but also the feeling of centrality, the feeling of within ASEAN that work together. That's also very important.
There has been a couple of years since the inception of RCEP, which is emerging as one of the largest trading blocs in human history.
That's right.
And then the potential is huge in terms of cutting and slashing tariffs for the chunk of the goods and services traded between our two sides. What is the current state of affairs regarding RCEP for businesses and investors and traders?
Yeah. I mean, one thing, for example, just to inform you that RCEP is, in a way now, we have an office of RCEP in Jakarta at the ASEAN Secretariat, to start with, and hopefully to have its own secretariat for the RCEP because it's very important. It's the largest market. But now what we are doing, for example, and we are talking to all the chambers in ASEAN, we say, let's do this, let's simplify this. RCEP is so big. I mean, but for the companies, for the medium size, small, they want to use it too, but they don't understand what is this RCEP, right? What we are trying to do is how to make sure that people who do not understand even that can utilize it, because it's so big. Now we have to simplify it to just a common language to get it easier, so that people can use that RCEP. So now we are doing this awareness and simplifying it and creating the platform so that without their realizing, they say, oh, I want to sell to here. They are actually applying that. And then with all this ChatGPT and so forth, right, it'll be easier also to get this, people asking questions and says, this is the way to do it. So now is how this RCEP can be simplified in language per se, so that people understand and people use them. And this is our work right now. This is what we are doing, pushing, not in it, but the whole of ASEAN and of course Indonesia.
What would you identify as the major challenges and obstacles faced with the ASEAN businesses when it comes to engaging with their Chinese counterparts, entering into the Chinese market and maneuvering through the myriad of policies and regulations?
Interaction is one thing, it's communication, right? And how to be able to have this easier communication between us so that more can work together, right? We need this kind of, like for example, platforms for everyone to understand. It's like a machine. You have an engine. Now, but this engine is like a car that you can actually drive it 150 kilometers per hour or 200 kilometers per hour. Right now, we are really pressing this. But right now it's 40 kilometers, 50 kilometers. We want to push more, but we need to understand more. And this is back to utilizations. Yeah, the more they utilize it, and the more people will say, okay, we need this more. So we need to actually improve continuously. Yeah. So I don't want to say that there is one challenge or two challenges. There is always challenge because there's no perfect world. And what we need to do is to improve this. So I want to get a positive thing about this is there is this RCEP. It's new. Let's work on it. Let's utilize it because we wouldn't know the problem if not being utilized. And so far, thinking all sides, everybody is thinking very positively, wanting to work always continuously to say, okay, what's needed, what's important to improve, let's improve it. But utilizations of it is key. That's where we want to push first today.
Mm-hmm. And also, can you explain to our viewers, many of them are potential investors, business owners, they want to understand more about ASEAN because ASEAN is not just a monolithic whole when you think about it. They have different member states, have different political systems, different religions, they span different geographies in that very important part of the world. How would you explain to them about what ASEAN is all about, maybe mainly from a business point of view?
From the business point of view is number one here. I think we have shared values between China and ASEAN. One thing that is important, that's alignment. And after that is that all of us are very open, character-wise, open hand to do business, especially with China. And that's why it is, I think, important for the Chinese to start, the tourism. Just come and visit, because at the end of the day, you have to see the people and try the food. I know it's very simple, but that's how it started. You go in there, visit ASEAN, try the food of each one, talk to the people. That's number one step. Then visit, for example, we always have this ASEAN Week. And what's happening this year, for example, we will have what we call the ASEAN Week from September 1st to September 8th. We have a series of events called the ASEAN Business Investment Summit and also the ASEAN Infrastructures Indo-Pacific Forum. This is like this kind of forum. I think it's good for Chinese companies to come. Yeah. All the ASEAN businesses are open to the business, open to do business with a Chinese company. And there are already so many Chinese companies actually there in ASEAN and learning from them. Or, for example, for ASEAN Business Advisory Council, we are open to actually, if they need to assist. And each of the country, they have their own chambers. And they have this called usually what we call the business desk, in which we are very open to actually, to have inquiries and to help Chinese to come and to see how to do business.
I think I checked the list of 3 or 4 of the ASEAN member states. Have a long way to go.
Yeah, of course. I mean, if you look at the whole of ASEAN, there's 10 countries. Each of the countries are very much different, right? But you can see, like for example, there's Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, and all. But even Myanmar, I was in Myanmar, because I say, politics is politics. For us, business to business approach, people to people approach are very important. So when We went there for, just take an example, and we were informing them about this ASEAN QR code for payments, right? And I was there, and they said, you know, the Myanmar, we want to participate. We want to be there. So this year, he said, they will finalize their, standards of QR code in Myanmar, and hopefully by next year they'll be wants to join. So I can see, even Myanmar, in this digital world of transformation, they are there, and they want to be part of this.
I understand that you guys have been in talks with Bank of China people to discuss steps forward when it comes to mutual recognition of their own currencies, aka QR code.
That's right. I mean, this is important. This is good. Indonesia already have this, for example, the agreements within that to do more. Let's say if you can use Indonesian rupiah or China yuan and all the local currency, why not, right? At the end of the day, I think we all respect the sovereignty of each one of us. And I think we also have to think how to reduce costs. and yeah, it's reducing costs, right? And it's good for business. And so we're supporting all of those.
We're marking the 10th anniversary of a very important initiative here. That is the Belt and Road Initiative, involving over 100 countries right now.
Yes.
How do you look at the merit of this initiative?
I mean, when it was introduced in the very beginning, people have a lot of questions, right? But I think actions speak itself. I can see what's happening. I was in Laos, right? And I saw this railway, right? And how this connectivity from Laos to whole of ASEAN. For Laos, it's like, wow, we got this. If not, they're trapped inside, right? Only land.
Landlocked country.
Landlocked country, that's right. So now I can see that. And that's part of the, the One Belt, One Road initiative, yeah? And I do believe that's very important to give this access of trades and investment. And I can see how, Laos, for example, now the gate to ASEAN, and how the connectivity to Singapore, to Malaysia, and so forth. And I can see how Laos all the way to Vietnam, China, until Europe. And we do believe that infrastructure is very important for the development. Indonesia has been pushing infrastructures, but our President Widodo for the past almost 10 years, since his first term, pushing for these infrastructures. Very soon, on August 18, as an example, in Jakarta, we will launch the high-speed train. That's a China high-speed train in Indonesia, right? That's August 18. That will be the. So I can see. I mean, at the end, we need the infrastructures. If people want to invest in that, why not, right? And so I see the skepticism of the beginning until when we see today. I think actions, we can see the actions. And we do love actions, not just the talk, but putting where the money, where your mouth is. And I think that's what's happening with Oboro.
Chairman Rasjid, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you.
And that's all the time we have, but thank you so much for visiting us. Hope you enjoy the rest of your trip.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
That will do it for this edition of The Hub on CGTN. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you again next time.